From refusing to get the COVID vaccine in time for the Australian Open, to losing millions worth of prize money because of it, Novak Djokovic's decision to not get vaccinated seems to be catching up to him. But how much money has he lost so far? Well, let's take a look. Starting off with how Novak's taken a hit after hit since 2022. Now, when the COVID-19 pandemic took the world by storm, countries and governments all around the world put up pretty strict rules and regulations in place to control the spread of the virus. Because of this, plenty of people who relied on air travel had to undergo a series of additional steps to prove that they weren't infected by the virus and were safe to fly. Now, before the vaccine came out, traveling internationally required a series of negative COVID-19 tests, a couple of hours apart, and passengers would then be allowed to travel as long as they followed SOPs. But after the vaccine came out, the rules shifted a little, and all you had to do was show your proof of vaccination before traveling, especially internationally. Now here's the kick. Obviously, since the vaccines were new, there were plenty of people who didn't exactly trust them. And among those was none other than tennis star Novak Djokovic, who just straight up refused to get the jab. Now, if you're someone who spent most of the lockdown at home, not getting vaxxed wasn't something that actually affected you. But this is Novak we're talking about, the guy who flies around the world to play tennis, flying that requires proof of vaccination. So for him to actively avoid something like that, of course, turned his career upside down. It even led to him being deported from Australia in 2022. And boy, was that chaotic. Now, if you recall, aside from China, Australia had one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. I mean, they closed their borders to everyone who wasn't a resident in 2020 to curb the spread. And that went on for quite some time until the restrictions were lifted and life had gone back to normalcy, at least somewhat. But still, there were some prerequisites required from international passengers. So when Novak showed up in his unvaccinated glory for the Australian Open in 2022, things didn't exactly go his way. It took a judge's ruling for him to take the first flight out of the country, since the government couldn't excuse his decision to stay unvaccinated. And hey, you can't blame them for looking out for their people. But here's what happened afterward. Following his decision to sort of sidestep the global vaccine program, what happened in Australia was just the first of many incidents. In fact, Novak missed all events in America last year, including 4 ATP events and the US Open. Now, what this did was, it basically cost him his status at the top of the ATP rankings, because before Novak decided to go full anti-vax, the 22-time Grand Slam winner was basically number one. But because he missed so many crucial events in the past year, he's now in danger of losing his spot once again. In fact, if we fast forward a bit to 2023, even this year alone, Novak's missed his chance to play at the Indian Wells and Miami Masters again, which basically means that this time around, he's going to suffer even more financial losses than last year, after not being able to play at all in the big leagues, since the US government's not exempting him for being unvaxxed. Despite many tournament directors urging US authorities to let their best guy play, Djokovic has unfortunately not been granted any sort of relief. And because of that, the cost of Novak's absence keeps going up. Now, just for the sake of this video, let's assume Novak would have won some of the events he missed, if not all. This would mean that he's lost a chance to compete for some insane prize money checks. And it all goes back to the Australian Open in 2022. You see, if only Novak had given in and gotten the jab, he wouldn't have to miss out on winning $1.93 million back then. Plus, let's not forget, by missing the Indian Wells and Miami Masters in 2022, the Serbian lost another $1.23 million for each, respectively. Of course, he also took a hit by not going for the Canadian Open in 2022. Had Novak played back then, he probably would have won and taken the $915,000 prize back home. But sadly, things just didn't turn out that way. The same fate followed him at the Cincinnati Masters in 2022. The prize money of $970,000 might have just been another payday for him if he had just put his trust in the vaccine like everybody else. But I guess Novak's determination goes way beyond just the tennis court. The 35-year-old player's potentially lost a lot because of his whole U.S. entry fiasco too. What would have brought him a whopping $2.6 million is now just another name added to the list of events he missed out on because of his personal choices. And just like last year, his absence from the Australian Open, the Indian Wells, and Miami Masters in 2023 might hurt his chances at a huge payday even further. Now, if only the tournament directors were able to pull some strings and get Novak to play in their leagues, the Serbian champ would have found himself taking home a heck of a lot of prize money this year too. I'm talking a little over $1 million from each of the three, by the way, bringing the total up to $13.38 million. How crazy is that? Sure, I do admit that these numbers represent best-case scenarios at best, but we all know Djokovic would have been a strong favorite to win the title in all 8 of these tournaments. Aside from some hefty monetary losses, Novak lost potential ranking points too. A few experts suggest that the Serbian has lost around 11,000 ATP ranking points. And if things go on like this gap could increase a whole lot more now that his option to play in alternative tournaments away from America has also been limited. While some people are hopeful that the Miami Open might just be the last tournament he'll miss because of his whole ordeal with the COVID vaccine, most fans are convinced that it's going to take some time for him to find his footing again. For now, though, Novak's future hangs in the balance. Even though most of the world has lifted its COVID protocols, the U.S. is still the last country to have restrictions against unvaccinated travelers. Considering Novak's refusal over the past 14 months, though, it's hard to say if he'll eventually give in and make himself phased. But seeing how certain policies will be lifted when the United States government ends its COVID-19 emergency declarations soon in May, there's a chance that Novak might be returning to the court soon. Miami Open's tournament director James Blake is understandably disappointed that he couldn't rake in one of the best players in the game, considering their status as a Premier League. But he said since he's exhausted all options to get the Serbian to enter U.S. borders, his hands are tied. But since the Miami Open will be Novak's last absence, fans are just dying to know when they'll be able to see the Grand Slam champion next. Fortunately for them, Djokovic is all set to return to the court at the Monte Carlo Masters, which is the curtain raiser for the European clay season. I mean, Novak's already been a 2-time champion there, so hopefully he'll be taking the trophy home this time too, because at this point, he definitely needs it. Having said that, that's all for how much Novak Djokovic has lost due to his vaccine decision.